David sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the empty cup of instant noodles beside him. It was all he had eaten last night, and he wasn't sure if he even had enough coins left for breakfast. His small apartment smelled of damp walls and old carpet, the kind of smell that never went away no matter how much you cleaned. The rent was due in 3 days, and his boss had cut his hours again. Life felt like a sinking ship, and David was tired of bailing water with his bare hands. Then his old phone began to ring. The sound was strange, a number he didn't recognize. He almost ignored it, thinking it was another debt collector, but something made him pick it up. Mr. David Carter. A calm, confident voice asked, "Yes, who's this?" David replied, trying not to sound too tired, "Congratulations. You have been selected to receive a prize of $5 million, the voice said without hesitation. David laughed under his breath. "Yeah, right. Is this some kind of scam?" "This is no scam, Mr. Carter," the voice continued. "You have until midnight to claim your prize, or it will be given to someone else." David froze. Midnight. $5 million. It sounded impossible, yet the man's tone was steady, almost serious enough to make David believe. "How do I claim it?" David asked, his voice shaking slightly. "Come to the Platinum Tower in the city. Floor 47, ask for room 7. Bring your ID, no one else," the voice instructed. Before David could ask another question, the line went dead. For a full minute, he just sat there, phone in hand. $5 million could change everything. No more tiny apartment. No more counting coins for food. No more being pushed around by bosses who didn't care if he lived or starved. But there was something odd. How did they know his name and number? And why such a short deadline? David grabbed his worn jacket and stepped outside. The cold morning air slapped his face. Waking him up, the bus was late as usual, so he decided to walk to the train station as he moved through the busy streets. He felt a strange sensation, like eyes on his back. He turned quickly, but the crowd behind him looked normal. Still, the feeling wouldn't leave him when he finally boarded the train. That's when he saw him, a man in a black coat, sitting 3 seats away, his eyes locked on David. At first, David thought it was nothing. It's maybe just a random glance. But each time David shifted in his seat, the man moved too. His face was blank. His stare unblinking. David felt his heartbeat quicken. He decided to get off 2 stops early, hoping to lose him in the crowd. The doors slid open, and David stepped onto the platform. He didn't look back, just kept walking fast, weaving between people. Then he felt it, a light tap on his jacket. David spun around, but no one was close enough to touch him. Confused, he reached into his pocket. His fingers brushed against something smooth. He pulled out a small envelope, yellowed at the edges. Opening it, he froze. Inside was an old photograph, a picture of himself as a child, no more than 5 years old. Next to it, in neat black letters, were 3 words. "Don't trust them." David's mouth went dry. He looked around for the man in the black coat. But he was gone. The train station, suddenly, felt colder. He had no idea who had put this in his pocket, or why. Was it a warning about the prize, or a trick to scare him away? David's mind raced, but one thought pushed through all the noise: $5 million. If it was real, he couldn't just walk away. If it was fake, he would find out soon enough. Either way, he had to know. He stuffed the envelope into his jacket and headed back toward the train. Whatever was waiting for him at the Platinum Tower, he would face it. The city skyline was already rising in the distance, somewhere up there on the 47th floor. Room 7 was waiting, and David had no idea that his life was about to be turned upside down forever. The city train rattled forward, its steel wheels screeching against the tracks. David sat near the corner seat, his eyes fixed on the glass, but his mind was far from the passing streets. The photograph in his pocket felt heavier than a brick. The 3 words, "Don't trust them," burned in his thoughts. Who had sent it? Who was them? And why did it have his picture from when he was a child? As the train swayed, David's eyes wandered down the aisle. That's when he saw him again, the man in the black coat. He was tall, his shoulders wide, his hair hidden under a dark cap. But it wasn't his size that made David uneasy. It was the way he looked directly at him, like he wasn't even trying to hide it. The man's face was calm, almost too calm, and there was something in his eyes. Not anger, not friendliness, just knowing. David tried to act casual, glancing away. But every few seconds, he checked again. The man's gaze never moved. It was as if he was studying him. Memorizing every detail, David's hand instinctively touched the envelope in his pocket. He didn't know if this man had put it there or if he was connected to it, but one thing was certain: this man was following him. When the train reached the next stop, David stood up quickly. The doors slid open, and he stepped off, joining the crowd rushing toward the stairs. For a brief moment, he thought he had lost him, but when he glanced back, there he was, moving through the people like a shadow. The man's pace was slow, deliberate, like he knew David couldn't run forever. David's pulse quickened. He turned down a side hallway, hoping to shake him off. The sound of his own footsteps echoed against the tiled walls. Then he heard another set, heavier, slower, but not far behind. David's breath turned shallow. Kay reached the end of the hallway, pushing through a heavy door into the street. Cold wind hit his face, and he walked fast, pretending not to notice the man who stepped out just seconds later. He decided to test him. David crossed the street at the last moment, the traffic light turning red behind him. The man stopped on the other side. For a second, David thought maybe he had given up. But then the man took out a phone, spoke into it briefly, and began walking again. This time, his eyes were locked on David with even more intent. David's heart was pounding. Why was this happening? If the prize was real, why would someone follow him like this? And if it was fake, what was the point of all this? He ducked into a small cafe, pretending to browse the menu by the counter. The bell above the door jingled, and David didn't even have to look to know who it was. The man in the black coat walked in, scanning the room. David grabbed a coffee. He didn't even want, slipped out the side door, and started down a narrow alley. The smell of wet garbage filled the air. The sound of footsteps followed. David turned, ready to confront him. The man stopped just a few steps away. Up close, David could see his face clearly: sharp jaw, thin lips, and eyes that seemed older than the rest of him. "I'm not here to hurt you," the man said in a low voice. "Then why are you following me?" David demanded. "Because if you go to that building, you won't come out," the man replied. David narrowed his eyes. "What are you talking about?" The man reached into his coat slowly, pulling out another photograph. This one showed a tall building, platinum tower, but in the picture, the building was surrounded by police tape, broken windows, and a date written in red ink: August 14th, 2007. That was the last time someone claimed a prize there. The man said they never made it out alive. David's stomach twisted. He wanted to ask more, but the man's voice grew sharper. "You have until midnight to choose money or your life," he said. Before David could respond, the man stepped back into the shadows, disappearing into the alley as if he had never been there. David stood frozen, the coffee cup shaking in his hand. The wind seemed colder now. In his pocket, the original photo felt heavier. What was going on? Why would someone warn him not to trust the prize? And why did it feel like everyone knew something about him that he didn't? The clock on the cafe wall read 2:17 p.m. Time was slipping away. The Platinum Tower still called to him. $5 million was too big to ignore, but the warning echoed in his head. "If you go to that building, you won't come out, David." Turned toward the city center. Whether it was a trap or not, he had to see for himself. Somewhere high above, on the 47th floor, Room 7 was waiting, and now, so was something much darker. The sun was sinking lower in the sky, turning the tall glass buildings golden. David's footsteps echoed as he walked toward the Platinum Tower. The air felt heavier now, not from the weight of the city, but from the warning still ringing in his head. If you go to that building, you won't come out, the stranger had said. But $5 million was still $5 million. And for a man drowning in debt, it was a lifeline he couldn't throw away. The Platinum Tower rose high above everything else, its mirrored windows reflecting the sunset like fire. At the entrance, 2 security guards in dark suits stood perfectly still, their faces unreadable. David took a deep breath and walked in. The lobby was too clean, too polished, with white marble floors and soft music playing from hidden speakers. A woman at the reception desk smiled at him, but her eyes didn't. "Name?" she asked, her voice smooth but cold. "David Carter," he said, sliding his ID across the counter. Her fingers brushed over the card lightly, almost like she was checking for something. "Please wait in room 7, she said, her lips curling into a smile that looked practiced. 47th floor, David hesitated. He glanced around the lobby and noticed 2 cameras pointed directly at him. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice whispered that maybe this was the moment to leave. But his feet moved toward the elevator anyway. When the doors opened, he stepped in, pressing the button for 47. The elevator hummed softly as it rose, each floor number lighting up one by one. By the time it reached the 40th floor, David's palms were sweating at 45. He remembered the photograph from the stranger, the one showing this building covered in police tape. The doors slid open at 47, revealing a long carpeted hallway. Room numbers were etched into gold plates on each door. David followed the signs until he reached room 7. The door was slightly open, and light spilled into the hallway. Just as he reached for the handle, a hand grabbed his arm. David spun around. It was the man in the black coat. "How?" David began, but the man's grip tightened. "Don't go in there," he said in a harsh whisper. "What is going on?" David demanded. "They're not giving you money. They're taking something from you." The man replied. David's eyes narrowed. What could they possibly take? "I don't own anything." The man's expression was grim. "They're not after what you own. They're after you." David pulled his arm free. "This is insane," he said. The man sighed. Reaching into his coat again, pulling out a small metal device, he pressed a button, and a holographic image flickered in the air between them. It showed a room, bright lights, people strapped into chairs, tubes connected to their arms. In the background, a large machine pulsed with a dull red glow. "This is room 7, the man said quietly. "They hook you up to this machine and drain something from you. Not money, not blood. Something else." David felt his stomach twist. "What are you talking about?" The man looked him in the eye. "Your life, your memories, your mind, everything that makes you you." David shook his head. "No, this is crazy," he said. Though part of him wasn't sure anymore, the man stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Your parents knew about this place. That's why they disappeared when you were young." David's breath caught. He had never known why his parents left, only that one day they were gone. "What do you know about my parents?" he asked. The man's lips tightened. "More than I can tell you here, but if you go in that room, you'll never learn the truth." The door to room 7 creaked open wider. A woman in a white coat stepped out, her smile bright but her eyes cold. "Mr. Carter, we're ready for you," she said. David glanced between her and the man in the black coat. Every instinct in his body screamed to turn and run, but another part whispered that maybe he needed to see what was inside. If there were answers in that room, he had to know. he took a step forward. And the man in the black coat grabbed his shoulder. "Don't," he warned again. David's heart pounded in his ears. The woman's smile never wavered. "Come inside." "Mr. Carter, your life is about to change forever," she said. The words sounded sweet, but they carried a weight that made David's skin crawl. For a moment, the hallway was silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the elevator doors closing behind him. David realized he was standing at a crossroads, one step forward into room 7, or one step back toward the unknown with the man who had been following him. The clock in the hallway showed 6:48 p.m. Time was running out, whatever he chose. There was no turning back. David stood frozen between two worlds in front of him. The woman in the white coat waited with a smile that seemed carved into her face behind. Him, the man in the black coat, stood tense, his hand still gripping David's shoulder. The hallway felt like it was shrinking, the walls pressing closer, the air growing heavier. "Mr. Carter, this way," the woman said again, her voice calm but sharp underneath. "She's lying." The man in the black coat muttered, "You step inside that room and you won't be you anymore." David's eyes darted between them. The woman's white coat was spotless, not a single wrinkle, her hands folded neatly in front of her. The man's black coat was worn and dusty, his eyes hard but alive with urgency. The contrast between them made David feel like he was standing in the middle of some strange play where everyone already knew their lines except him. "What's going on?" David asked, his voice cracking slightly. The woman tilted her head, her smile deepening. "You've won a life-changing opportunity," she said. "Room 7 is where we confirm your prize." "Nothing more," the man in the black coat scoffed. "She means confirm what they take from you," he said. "That's not money waiting for you in there. It's a machine that drains your life." David's stomach twisted. He didn't know who to believe. "What do you mean by life?" David asked the man. "Your mind, your memories, your energy. They drain it and sell it to the highest bidder." The man replied, his voice low and tight. David turned to the woman. "That's insane, right?" Aki said, hoping for reassurance. But her smile didn't falter. "Mr. Carter, you're being manipulated by someone who doesn't want you to claim what's rightfully yours," she said smoothly. The man took a step forward, putting himself between David and the woman. "I'm here to keep you alive," he said. "That's all that matters." The tension was so thick David could barely breathe. The woman's eyes flicked toward the man, and for a split second her smile dropped. It was replaced by something colder, sharper, security, she said into a small device at her wrist. Almost instantly, two men in dark suits appeared at the end of the hallway, walking toward them. David's pulse spiked. The man in the black coat leaned close. "You need to come with me now." "Before they close in," he whispered, but David hesitated. $5 million could erase every struggle he'd ever had. He imagined paying off his debts, buying a new home, starting over. Could he really walk away from that? Then the memory of the photograph in his pocket returned. Don't trust them. And the picture of himself as a child. How did they even have that? The security guards were getting closer, their footsteps heavy against the carpet. The woman in white stepped back toward room 7, holding the door open. "Mr. Carter, inside, please," she said, her voice now an order rather than an invitation. The man in the black coat grabbed David's wrist. "They'll close that door, and you'll never—" "Come out," he said firmly. David's heart raced. He didn't know which way was up anymore. The guards were only a few steps away now. The woman's smile had returned, almost as if she could already taste victory. The man in black gave one final warning. "If you go with her, you'll be gone before midnight." Something inside David snapped. He yanked his arm free, turned sharply, and ran down the hallway toward the far stairwell. The man in the black coat sprinted after him. Shouts rang out behind them, the guards giving chase. The heavy stairwell door slammed shut, the sound echoing in the enclosed space. David took the stairs 2 at a time, his breath coming hard. He didn't know where they were going, but he knew one thing: he couldn't go back. They burst out into a lower-floor hallway and pushed through an emergency exit. Spilling into the back alley behind the Platinum Tower, David bent over, hands on his knees, gasping for air. The man in the black coat stood watch, scanning the alley. What is this? David finally managed to ask between breaths. It's a game, the man said grimly. One they've been playing for years, baiting desperate people with promises they can't refuse. Then, taking everything from them, David felt sick. But why me? He asked. The man's eyes darkened. Because of your parents, he said. They knew something they weren't supposed to. And they tried to expose it, but they vanished before they could. David's head spun. What happened to them? That's what I'm trying to find out, the man said. And now, so are they, through you. David straightened slowly. The city lights flickered on above them, the street humming with life in his pocket. The envelope with his childhood photo felt heavier than ever. Somewhere inside that tower, room 7 still waited. And now David knew it wasn't just about money. It was about a truth someone didn't want him to uncover. The game had started, and he was already a piece. On the board, the city felt different at night. Shadows stretched long across the streets. Neon lights flickered like watchful eyes, and the air buzzed with a strange tension. David and the man in the black coat, Ethan, as he had finally introduced himself, moved quickly through narrow back alleys. Keeping low, it was 11:03 p.m., less than an hour until the midnight deadline. And David knew they weren't free yet. From somewhere behind them, the low hum of an engine echoed between the buildings. Ethan glanced over his shoulder, his jaw tightening. They're coming, he said simply. David's pulse jumped. Who's coming? He asked, though deep down he already knew. They're hunters, the kind who never fail. Ethan replied. They crossed a deserted intersection. A black SUV rolled into view from the far corner, headlights cutting through the darkness. David and Ethan bolted shoes slapping against wet pavement. The SUV accelerated, its tires squealing as it turned sharply to follow. Ethan grabbed David's arm and pulled him into another alley. The vehicle's lights flashed past, but David knew it wouldn't take long for them to circle back. Why are they chasing me like this? David panted. Because once you walked into that building, you became theirs, Ethan said. And the fact you left, that makes you dangerous. David's mind spun a few hours ago. All he had was an empty wallet and a dead-end job. Now, he had people chasing him through the city like he was carrying state secrets. In a way, maybe he was. They emerged onto a busier street. The noise of traffic masking their footsteps for a moment, Ethan steered David toward an old parking garage. Once inside, the dim yellow lights flickered above, casting long shadows between rows of empty cars. David's breath was ragged. He wanted to ask where they were going, but then he heard its heavy footsteps on the concrete, echoing through the garage. Ethan motioned for silence. They ducked behind an old van just as 2 men in black suits entered from the far side. Their movements were calm but precise, each step measured. These weren't ordinary guards. They moved like predators. David's palms were slick with sweat. One of the men paused, tilting his head as if listening. David's heartbeat felt so loud he was sure they could hear it. Ethan leaned close, whispering into David's ear. When I say run, you run toward the far stairwell. Don't look back. David nodded slowly. Then Ethan stood, stepping out into view. Hey! One of the men barked, reaching for his side. Ethan bolted in the opposite direction. Drawing their attention, David hesitated, every instinct screamed to follow, but he remembered Ethan's words. He ran toward the far end of the garage. His footsteps loud now. Behind him, shouts echoed as the guards split up. One went after Ethan, the other's footsteps closed in on David. He threw himself through the stairwell door. The clang of metal ringing in his ears, he leaped down the stairs, taking them two at a time. The guard's steps pounded after him. David pushed through another door, bursting into a narrow back street. Cold air burned his lungs. He turned left, then right. Weaving through small lanes, in the distance, the black SUV roared to life again. Headlights swinging wildly, David's legs screamed in pain, but he forced himself to keep running, somewhere above. A church bell began to toll, the sound hollow and slow. It was 11:45 p.m. Ethan appeared from a side alley, his coat torn at the sleeve. "They're tightening the circle," he said, grabbing David's shoulder. "We have to move now." David followed without question. They ran until the streets narrowed into an old district of the city, tall brick buildings leaning over the cobblestone road like old giants. There, Ethan stopped suddenly, pulling David into a hidden doorway. "Stay quiet," he whispered. The SUV passed by the mouth of the street, its engine rumbling low through a crack in the doorway. David saw one of the suited men step out, scanning the area with cold, calculating eyes. They were close, too close. Ethan slowly pulled a small object from his coat. It was the same metal device he had shown earlier, the one that projected images, but now, instead of a picture, it displayed a map of the city. Red dots moved across it, each one representing a pursuer. "They've got us boxed in," Ethan said grimly. David's chest tightened. "So, what now?" he asked. Ethan's eyes met his. "Now, we make them think they've won," he said. "And when they relax, we take the truth from them." From somewhere far off, another bell began to chime. 11:55 p.m. David realized this wasn't just about escaping anymore. It was about surviving the next 5 minutes. If they could make it to midnight, maybe they could disappear. But as the last bell struck, the sound of footsteps closed in again. This time, there was nowhere left to run. The air was cold and sharp. Every sound seemed louder in the empty street. The soft scrape of shoes on stone, the low growl of an engine idling somewhere close. David's back pressed against the brick wall, his breath shallow. Ethan stood beside him, eyes scanning the darkness for movement. "They're close," Ethan whispered. "Too close." From the corner of the street, two men in black suits emerged, walking slowly. Their pace was calm, almost casual, but their eyes locked on David like hunters who had already trapped their prey. Behind them, the black SUV rolled into view, its headlights slicing through the shadows. A figure stepped out from the back. The woman in the white coat. Her smile was the same as before, polite yet cold. "Mr. Carter," she called softly, her voice carrying through the night. "There's no need to run anymore." David's pulse pounded in his ears. Ethan took a small step forward, placing himself between David and the approaching figures. "You come any closer, and this ends differently than you expect," Ethan warned. The woman tilted her head, almost amused. "Ethan, you've always been dramatic," she said, "but you know how this works. He has a choice. And the clock is almost out." David's hands clenched into fists. "What choice?" he asked, his voice sharp. The woman's eyes met his. "You can walk back with us now. Claim your $5 million and never worry about anything again," she said smoothly. "Or you can keep running with him, and you'll lose everything, including your life." Ethan turned sharply toward David. "She's lying. You take that money, and they'll drain you dry," he said. "You won't even remember your own name by morning." David's chest tightened. The photograph in his pocket felt heavier than ever. "Why me?" he demanded. The woman's smile faltered for a second. "Because you're valuable," she said, her tone dropping. "More than you understand. Your parents knew it. And they paid the price for keeping it from us." Ethan stepped closer to her, his voice low and dangerous. "You don't get to say their names." The tension between them was like a wire ready to snap. David looked from one to the other, his mind spinning. On one side, the promise of money and security, an escape from the life he'd been trapped in. On the other, a man who had been chasing him all day, claiming to protect him from something worse than death. The truth was, he didn't know if either of them was telling the whole story. The woman took a step forward, her hand outstretched. "Mr. Carter, you can still walk away from all this," she said gently. Her voice was warm now, almost kind. David felt the pull, the idea of never worrying about bills, never eating instant noodles for dinner again, never sleeping in a damp apartment. But Ethan's voice cut through the temptation like a blade. "If you take her hand, you'll never see another sunrise as yourself," he said firmly. "You'll still be alive, but you won't be you." The SUV's engine rumbled behind her. The men in suits stood ready, their eyes never leaving David. The night felt still, like the whole world was holding its breath. David swallowed hard. "What happens if I say no?" he asked. The woman's eyes turned cold again. "Then we take you anyway, but without the reward," she said flatly. David's heartbeat was a drum in his chest. Ethan leaned closer, his voice low. "If you trust me, I can get you out. But you have to decide now." The clock tower in the distance began to chime. Midnight was seconds away. The woman's hand remained outstretched, her smile returning like she already knew his answer. David's mind flashed through memories. His parents' faces, blurry from the few photos he had left. The photograph in his pocket with the words, "Don't trust them." The hologram Ethan had shown him of the strange machine. Then he thought about his own life, the years of scraping by, the nights spent, wondering if he'd ever catch a break. 5 million could change everything. But if Ethan was right, it could also end everything. The final chime rang out. David exhaled sharply and made his move. He turned away from the woman and ran, Ethan following instantly. Shouts erupted behind them, the men in suits breaking into a sprint. The SUV roared forward, tires screeching. David didn't look back. He couldn't. They cut through a side street, feet pounding against the cobblestones. The sound of pursuit echoed close behind. Ethan grabbed David's arm, pulling him into a narrow doorway from his coat. He pulled out the metal device again. "This is it," Ethan said, pressing a button. "We disappear or we die." A faint hum filled the air, and a strange shimmer began to form in the doorway, like rippling glass. David stared at it in disbelief. "What is that?" he asked. "Our way out," Ethan replied. The footsteps grew louder. The woman's voice rang through the street, sharp and commanding. "Don't let them through." Ethan grabbed David's wrist. "Time to choose again," he said. "This time?" David didn't hesitate. He stepped into the shimmer, the world bending and breaking around him. And then everything went black. The world around David spun like water draining through a hole. Colors bled into one another, shapes twisted and bent, and a deep hum filled his ears until he thought his head would split. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. David stumbled forward, landing on a cold metal floor. Ethan caught his arm, steadying him. "Easy," Ethan said quietly. "We made it." David looked around. They were in a large, dimly lit room filled with strange machines. The air smelled faintly of ozone, and the walls hummed with a low vibration. It wasn't anywhere David recognized. "Where are we?" he asked. "A safe house," Ethan replied. "Off their grid, they can't track us here." David's head was still spinning. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the envelope with the photo of himself as a child. He held it out to Ethan. "You keep talking about my parents, about me being valuable. What do you know?" David demanded. Ethan's expression softened slightly. I know they were scientists, some of the best, he said. They worked for the same people who run the Platinum Tower. David frowned. Scientists. My parents worked in a factory. At least, that's what my aunt told me. Ethan shook his head. That's what they wanted you to believe, he said. Your parents were part of something called Project Dawn they were trying to create. A way to transfer human consciousness into a safe digital form. To preserve people forever. David stared at him. That sounds impossible, he said. Ethan gave a half smile. It's not only possible, they succeeded. He said, and you were the first. David blinked. The first what? The first child born with the ability to naturally store and transfer memories in your brain in a way no one else can. Ethan said, that's why they wanted you. Your mind is the perfect key to unlocking everything your parents built. The room seemed to tilt under David's feet. You're telling me? I'm some kind of experiment. Not an experiment, Ethan said firmly. You're their legacy, the proof that their work could change the world. David's chest felt tight. What happened to them? He asked quietly. Ethan looked away for a moment before answering. They refused to hand you over when you were a child, he said. So the company erased them, not killed. It's not in the way you think, but wiped. Like deleting a file on a computer. David's stomach turned. They erased their memories. Ethan nodded. They've been walking around for years, alive but not knowing who they are or that they ever had a son. David felt a lump form in his throat. The photograph in his hand shook. All this time. I thought they abandoned me, he whispered. They didn't, Ethan said gently. They fought for you until the very end, and now they want you to finish what they started. David's mind was a storm. The promise of $5 million. Seems so small now compared to what he had just learned. They would have taken me to room 7 and erased me like them, he said slowly. Ethan's jaw tightened. Exactly, but you escaped. And that means you have a chance. David looked at him. A chance for what? To find them and bring them back, Ethan said. The only way to restore their memories is to access the original Project Dawn data, and you're the only one who can open it. A long silence stretched between them. David stared at the machines lining the walls, their blinking lights reflecting in his eyes. If he walked away now, he could try to rebuild his life, but his parents would stay lost forever. If he stayed, he'd be going up against the same people who had hunted him all night. Either way, there was no going back to the life he had before. Finally, David straightened his shoulders. Where do we start? He asked. Ethan's eyes met his, a small flicker of approval there. We start by going back. Ethan said, not to room 7, to the archives beneath it. David's stomach nodded. They'll be waiting for us, he said. They will. Ethan agreed, but this time, we won't be the ones running, somewhere far away. The city clock struck 1. David slipped the photograph back into his pocket, his grip on it firm. The words "don't trust them" were no longer just a warning. They were a mission. He had been given a chance to change everything, not with money, but with the truth, and no matter what waited in the shadows. He wasn't going to stop until he found his parents and made the people who took them pay.